Hello, everyone. I am Alan Pringle. I am Chief Operating Officer at Scriptorium, and I just want to welcome everybody to LearningDITA Live. Our first session will give you an overview of DITA, and my colleague here at Scriptorium, Gretel Kinsey, will be offering this presentation. LearningDITA Live is brought to you by Scriptorium, the content strategy experts. Since 1997, Scriptorium has helped companies manage, structure, organize, and distribute content in an efficient way. If you are considering a move to DITA and XML as part of your content strategy, we can absolutely help you with that. LearningDITA.com and this event, LearningDITA Live, would not be possible without the help from our sponsors. And before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping things. During these sessions, attendees will be muted. If you have a question, you can type it at any time in the questions/chat module of the GoToWebinar interface. So if you would, please look for the questions chat module, and Greta will answer questions at the end of the session. Also, at the beginning of the question and answer session, I will drop a link to an evaluation form in there. So please click on that link and fill out the survey. We really appreciate your feedback on the sessions. And with that, we are ready to get started with our first session of LearningDITA Live 2018. Gretel, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Well, I am going to hand over the baton to you to let you tell people what DITA is all about.
All right. So hello, everyone, and welcome to DITA Overview. This session is designed for those of you who are unfamiliar with DITA, and it's going to cover all the basics of what DITA is and how to get started with using it. So as Alan mentioned, I'm Gretel Kinsey, and I'm a technical consultant here at Scriptorium. And I've been with the company since 2011, and I specialize in content strategy, information architecture, and DITA tools and technologies. And I've also written and contributed to a lot of the courses that we have on LearningDITA.com. So let's just start with the big question, which is, what is DITA? DITA stands for the Darwin Information Typing Architecture, and it's an open standard of XML that was originally created by IBM and donated to OASIS, which is the Organization for the Advancement of Structured Information Standards, in 2005. And DITA is an XML-based, tool-independent way to create and organize content. And not only that, but it's a way of creating structured, topic-based content that exists separately from its formatting. So let's break down what that means. And we're going to do that by starting with the concept of structured authoring. Structured authoring is a workflow that lets you define and enforce consistent organization of information in documents. So in an unstructured authoring environment, the hierarchy and the organization of your content might be defined in something like a style guide, but there's no way to ensure that authors always follow it. Whereas in a structured environment such as DITA, the hierarchy and the organization is inherent in the structure, and it's strictly defined and enforced by tags. Let's also talk about topic-based authoring. So topic-based authoring is where you create content where one file or one unit contains information on a single idea, and that's called a topic. And these topics can be assembled into documents for publication. And this is different from chapter-based or book-based authoring, where a single file might contain multiple different ideas or topics. Topic-based authoring is inherent in the structure of DITA. And finally, let's talk a little bit more about separating content from formatting. So in a desktop publishing-based environment or authoring tool, the formatting or the appearance of your content is going to be tied to the content itself. Content's created so that what you see is what you get in the final output when you're working in an unstructured environment. Whereas in DITA, you create the content and then the formatting is applied separately and automatically when your final deliverable or your final output is generated. So when you're writing the content, what you see is not what you get, and instead what you see is only one option for how that final deliverable might actually look. So now let's get into some of the benefits of DITA now that we've kind of gone over what DITA is. And let's talk about some of the reasons why you might want to use DITA. First is flexibility. So being an open standard of XML means that DITA is flexible. It can be used with a variety of different tools for authoring and editing and formatting. And if your business goals or your content needs ever change, if you're in DITA, that makes it easier to go from one tool set to another while still keeping your same source content. Next is semantic value. So the structure of DITA gives your content semantic value. DITA is a markup language, which means that every piece of content is going to be contained in tags. And semantic value means that the tag surrounding each piece of information has meaning. So your authoring and publishing tools know what kind of information is contained in each tag. And tagging your content so that it has semantic value helps with things like search and filtering. Next is reuse. Topic-based content is easier to reuse than something like book-based or chapter-based. And that's because individual topics can be used and reused in any order in a number of different documents. So in DITA, the topics are organized into maps, which are much like a table of contents, and they allow you to specify the order and the hierarchy of those topics. And we'll get into that a little more in depth later as well and see some examples. So a reusable topic addresses a single idea or question, and it contains enough information to stand on its own and doesn't assume any context about what information comes before or after it. And then finally, we have multiple outputs from a single source as a benefit of DITA. And that comes from this idea we just talked about of separating content from formatting. When you have your formatting existing separately from the content itself, that makes it easier to produce multiple outputs from one source. So if you need to publish more than one type of output, so for example, let's say you need PDF, HTML, and EPUB outputs. If you use something like DITA, that allows you to apply different formatting to the same set of source files. So that means that your PDF, your HTML, and your EPUB will all be consistent with each other because they were all published from that same source. And if you're producing multiple output types, but you don't have that separation of content and formatting, that means that you have to duplicate the content and reformat it for each different output type. And that involves a lot more time and effort than something like DITA where you just have one source. And it also introduces the possibility of errors. I want to get into another aspect of DITA that's really interesting and one of the hallmarks of DITA, which is specialization. So the markup language of DITA includes a predefined set of elements, and you can use those elements just as they are, but you can also specialize them for your individual content needs. Specialization allows an information architect to create elements that fit your organization better than what's provided in DITA by default. So this may include things like creating new elements to contain types of information that are not defined in DITA and give them semantic value. This may also include things like creating new names for your elements that are more relevant to your authors than the generic ones provided by DITA. And it may also include creating new elements to contain certain information in a specific order. So the level of specialization that you choose to do really depends on your own content needs. You may be able to use most of the DITA elements as they already are and only specialize or create customized versions of one or two elements, or depending on your needs, you might have an entire custom set of specialized elements that your authors will use. One thing to keep in mind when it comes to specialization is that when you specialize those default elements into custom ones, that adds to the cost of a DITA implementation. So it's important to balance the value that you gain from specialization against the cost of implementing and maintaining a specialization. And now I want to dive a little bit more in depth into DITA topics and what they are, what different types are available, and how you can use them. So a DITA topic is a building block of content, and one of the fundamental principles of DITA is that different types of content require different containers or topic types. And that way the elements in your topic are specific to the information that's being described. The DITA standard includes different types of topics that are intended for different purposes. And these topic types contribute to the semantic value of the content because the topic type lets you know what kind of information is contained within it. Some commonly used DITA topic types include topic, which is just the generic topic type. And also we have concept, task, reference, and glossary entry. So let's take a closer look at each of these different topic types. And we'll start with the generic topic. So all DITA topic types are related to this one common generic topic type. The structure of a topic includes some common elements, and these are the three basic building blocks of any topic, which are topic, title, and body. So every time you have a DITA topic, it's going to include these three elements at a minimum. So let's look at an example of what that might look like. This is a really simple, basic topic. And what we have on the left is some content, and on the right, we see that same content with DITA tags. So if we look at that content on the right, we start with a topic element, which is just a container element that tells us this is a topic. Then next we have the title element, and it contains the title of this topic, which is wild duck species. And then we have the body element, which contains all of the content in the body of this topic. So in this example, the body element just contains a single paragraph of content. The generic topic type is used as the basis for all of the other DITA topic types, as I mentioned, and that's one example of specialization in action. The default DITA standard actually specializes the generic topic type into the other ones, such as concept or task or reference or glossary. Many of the elements that we see in the generic topic type can also be used by the other topic types, such as, for example, we have paragraph in the body of this topic. You can use the paragraph element as well in the other topic types. And although you can use the generic topic type for authoring content, it's generally a lot better to use one of the more specific topic types, such as concept, task, reference, or glossary. So we're going to go over those topic types next. And of course, the reason it's better to use something more specific is semantic value. So let's talk about concept topics. A concept topic contains conceptual information and answers the question why. It provides background information about a subject that the reader needs to know. And it usually contains things like paragraphs of text and lists, but it can also include things like notes and tables and graphics that the reader would need to understand the ideas behind a particular subject. So here's a list of some common elements that you see within a concept topic. And as we saw with the generic topic type just a few minutes ago, we have the first three, concept, title, and con body, are analogous to where we had topic, title, and body. So these are basically the elements that have been specialized from topic, title, and body. So concept is just going to be the container element for your concept topic. Title is going to be the container element for your title, and con body is going to include the body of your concept topic. And some of the common elements that you'll find inside of a con body are P for paragraph, note for notes. You may have some list elements such as UL for unordered or bulleted lists, and OL for ordered or numbered lists. And you can also have images and tables. So here's an example of a concept topic, and this is actually the exact same information that we just saw in that generic topic type, but it's now presented in a concept. So this is where you get to see, if you look at the tagged content over on the right, we have the concept element containing the entire topic. Then we have the title element as we did before, and then we have the con body element containing that paragraph of information. And now that this is tagged as a concept topic, it has more semantic value than it did before, because we can look at that concept tag that contains the entire topic and we know what kind of information this is. Whereas when it was just a topic, that doesn't really tell you anything. But now we can look at this and say, okay, this is tagged with a concept, and we know that that means it's conceptual information. Now let's talk about task topics. So a task topic contains step-by-step or procedural information, and it answers the question, how? It can include instructions to complete a procedure and also things like step results, graphics, notes, and it can even include a level of sub-steps below your main steps. And technical content tends to be pretty heavy on tasks because it's telling your users, here's how you actually use our product. DITA offers two different types of task topics. So first, there's strict task, which requires all of your elements to appear in a specific order, and it's most appropriate for items that require step-by-step instructions. And then there's the general task, which is also known as a loose task, and this allows more flexibility in the order in which you present your elements. And it also allows your steps to contain much more varied content than they can in a strict task. So a general task is more appropriate for things like process overviews. And for our example, we're going to look at strict tasks because that's typically what you'll see more commonly when you have that step-by-step technical content. So some of the elements that you may see commonly in a strict task, again, we have these first three that are specialized from topic, title, and body. Now they become task, title, and task body. So again, task just is your container element for the whole task topic. Then we've got title for your title and task body to contain the body of your task. Some of the things that you will see inside of a task body, the most important one is steps, which is just a container element for your sequence of actions. Then inside of steps, you might see, or you will see, a sequence of individual step elements. So each step element has an individual action that you'll perform. And then inside of each step element, you'll have the command element, which is the action that the user actually takes. And this is a required element inside of step. So let's actually take a look at an example. We have a really simple task right here. It just has one step. And if we look over on the left, we have this what you see is what you get format. And then on the right, we have it tagged with DITA tags. So you see, again, as we have seen in our other examples, the container for the entire task, and that's in the task element. Then we've got our title and then task body. So now if you look inside task body, you can see how the steps element works. So you've got steps as your container for all of your steps. In this case, we just have the one. So then we have a step element that contains that step, and then inside of that we have the command, which actually has the text choose a location. And if you need to add more steps, then after that closing tag of the step element, you would start a new step element, and you can continue to have as many as you need. And then when you get to the end of your sequence of steps, that's when you close the steps element. And the reason that we use task topics instead of something like a generic topic with an ordered list, because that would look the same as this. You would see, something with a number 1 and some text, number 2 and some text. But the reason why it's really useful to use a task topic instead, again, is semantic value. So if you look at the actual tags and you see something like an OL and list items inside of that, that doesn't tell us anything except this is a list with numbers. But if you see something like a task, the tags tell us this actually is a series of steps. Now let's talk about reference topics. So the reference topic type is intended for reference information, and it answers the question, what? A reference topic typically contains descriptive facts such as the syntax of a command or API function call, tables listing operational characteristics and tolerances of a device, tables identifying items on a software screen, types of information like that. And reference topics don't include things like steps or background information. That's where you would use your tasks and your concepts. Reference topics are sort of similar to dictionary entries, and they provide only facts. So here are some common reference topic elements. And again, you're probably starting to see a pattern now. We have reference title and ref body, which again are specialized from the generic topic where you've got topic, title, and body. And then some of the things you might find in a ref body are tables. You might find a list of properties. And then there's the refsyn element, which is for a syntax diagram. So let's take a look at an example of that. This is, again, another very simple example of a reference topic. And this just contains a single entry in a syntax diagram. So on the left, we see this, and sort of what you see is what you get format. And on the right, again, we see it with DITA tags. And we have the reference element that contains the entire topic. We've got a title element which contains our title, TNAV, and then we have the ref body, which has the body of our reference. And so inside of here, we can see how the refsyn element works. Inside of that, we have a synph element and a var element, and this basically just allows us to define the syntax for TNAV. And finally, let's talk about glossary entry topics. So a glossary entry topic type defines a single term and answers the question, what does this mean? So a glossary topic will typically contain a term and then one or more definitions. So this has a little bit of a different structure than what we've seen before, where instead of having your container, your title, and your body, the glossary entry topic type will have a gloss entry element, which is the container for the entire topic. Then there's gloss term, which is the container for your word or phrase that you're defining, and the gloss def element, which is the definition of that glossary term. So let's see what that looks like. Here's an example of a glossary term and definition. So we're defining the word duck. And if we look at the content over on the right with DITA tags, we can see the gloss entry element containing that entire glossary entry topic. Then we have gloss term, which is the element that contains our term duck. And then we have gloss def, which is our element that contains the definition for duck. So now that we've talked about topics and we've seen some examples of different DITA topic types, let's talk about maps. So DITA topics can stand on their own, but content in one topic often has relationships to content in other topics. And a map is what describes the sequence and the hierarchy of topics for a deliverable. So it's one way that you can define those relationships that may exist among topics. A map file is how you organize your content for delivery. So it's sort of similar to, if you think about unstructured content, a table of contents. A map file allows you to create a sequence and a hierarchy among your DITA topics. So when you generate some output like a PDF file or a help system from a map file, your reader is going to see the topics in the order and hierarchy that are established by that map file. You generally don't add all of the topics that you have available to a map file. You just add the ones that you want included in that particular deliverable. And you can include the same topic in multiple different map files. So that's an example of how you reuse content in DITA. Map files are generally made up of two main components, and that is topic ref and map ref. So topic ref is an element that's used to provide a reference or a link to a specific topic. And similarly, map ref is an element that provides a reference or a link to another map. So let's take a look a little bit more in depth at how each of these are used. So for topic refs, in a map file, you use this to define or provide that link to a specific topic that you want to include in your map. And you can put topic refs in order in your map to indicate the sequence in which you want to present those topics. So here's an example where we have a map that's, again, very simple, and we're going to call this map Wild Ducks. And this map has two topic refs, and one of them goes to a topic called wild duck species, and the other one goes to a topic called watching wild ducks. So we see that over in the content on the right with DITA tags. We have, similarly to our other topic types we looked at, a map file is set up kind of in the same way, where you have a container element for the entire map, so that's the map element, and then we have a title for the map, which is going to be whatever the title you want for your publication. So in this case, it's Wild Ducks. And then for each topic that we want to include in this map, we have a topic ref element. Now, these are listed at the same level of hierarchy. If you want to nest topics or have a hierarchy where you've got subtopics, then you would actually include a topic ref inside of a topic ref. So before you have your close tag on your first topic ref, for example, if you have some other subtopics you want to include, you would have a topic ref element inside of that, and then you would close your second subordinate topic ref, then you would close the first topic ref, and that would allow you to nest your topics. Map refs are pretty similar. The main difference is that instead of linking to another topic, it links to another map. So you can have a map file and it can reference other existing maps. And these maps are generally referred to as subordinate or submaps, and they tend to be collections of related content to your main map. So let's take a look at an example of map ref. So what we have here is a map called Ducks, and it's set up just the same as our other map. We have the map element containing the entire map. We have the title element for Ducks. And then instead of having topic ref elements, we have map ref elements here. So we have one reference to a map called Wild Ducks, and then our second reference is to a map called Domestic Ducks. And when you use a map ref element, your table of contents for the main map will display all of the topics that these submaps reference. So for example, if you look at what you've got over on the left in table of contents form, there's a map ref to a map called Wild Ducks, and then you can see that that Wild Ducks map has the topics Wild Duck Species and Watching Wild Ducks inside of it. And then similarly for Domestic Ducks, that map has topics inside of it called Domestic Duck Species and Raising Domestic Ducks. Now that we've covered topics and maps, I want to talk about another really important aspect of DITA, which is metadata. Metadata means beyond data or data about data. And if you think about this kind of from an unstructured content point of view, you may have, for example, things like word processing applications that have document properties, and that will tell you things like who created the file, what date it was created on, when it was last modified. So things like author and modification date in your document properties are not part of the text that's actually displayed. They're metadata, so it's data about that document itself. And in XML content such as DITA, metadata lets you classify and manipulate your information. So in DITA, you can assign metadata to things like topics, individual elements, maps, and so on. So let's take a quick look at how your content creators might use metadata. One is they may label information with a document type, such as white paper or proposal, so they know what type of content that is. They may associate information with a specific product number. They may indicate a user level like beginner, intermediate, or expert. They might indicate an audience for the content such as manager or employee. They may provide status information for a topic, such as draft, review, or final, so you know what state that topic is in. They may provide an expiration date for when the information is no longer valid. So that's just some ways that when your authors are working with the content, they may use the metadata to help them know what's going on with the content, how it's being used, etc. But metadata also can be used by not just your content creators, but your content consumers as well. So after you've assigned metadata to your content, you or your readers can use it for things like finding information efficiently. They can use it to help support governance efforts, so they can control when information is made public or when it's removed from a website, for example. It can be used to personalize information, so your reader may request something like only beginner information. It can be used to filter information for delivery variants, such as Windows or Macintosh. It can also be used to help reuse information efficiently. It can indicate the language used in your content, which is really helpful if you localize. And it can also be used to manage product status. So when you're coming up with a content strategy, metadata strategy is a big part of that. And it should take into account things like how both of your content creators and your content consumers are going to be using your metadata. So you plan for what kinds of metadata you're going to track and how people both on the content creation and the content consumption side are going to use it. So let's talk about how you add metadata to your DITA content. In DITA and other XML-based formats, metadata is actually encoded inside of your topics, and it's included either at the topic level or on specific elements or at the map level. So you can manipulate DITA content using these metadata values. DITA requires you to have one piece of metadata across the board, and that is every topic has to have an ID attribute. So these IDs are often assigned automatically by your authoring tool or content management system. They can also be something that you set up yourself. Other elements also can use ID attributes. So for example, if you have something like a table or an image, then if you put an ID attribute on that element, then it allows you to create a cross-reference to it. And a lot of DITA authoring tools will automatically assign IDs to certain elements that might be cross-referenced. The organization or DITA setup you have may require additional metadata using other attributes. So for example, I mentioned localization just a minute ago. Something like the XML lang attribute is commonly used to include metadata about the language the content is written in. So that may be something that if your organization is localizing or translating content, XML lang may be a piece of metadata that you're required to track. Metadata can be contained using either default DITA using default DITA attributes, or you can use specialized attributes as well. So if DITA doesn't provide by default a piece of metadata or an attribute for a piece of metadata that you need, you can have an information architect come in and create specialized metadata attributes for you. So you could track something more specific to your organization that maybe DITA does not provide by default. And as a general rule, your readers are not going to see your metadata, but instead what they're going to see is the result of filtering or searching. So the metadata is going to really come into play when your readers are going through and saying, okay, give me only content for a novice level user, or give me content only for an expert level user. Or when they search your content and get results, that's where the metadata is really going to help them the most. When it comes to actually assigning metadata to your DITA content, that can be done at the topic level, the element level, or the map level. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at how that's done. So first we have an example of metadata at the topic level. And the first thing that we see is that piece of metadata I mentioned that's required, which is the ID attribute. So we have our topic element containing the entire topic, and that has an ID of domestic ducks. At the topic level, DITA also provides something called a prologue element, which can be used to store metadata for the entire topic. So a few really useful prologue elements are author, which is what's shown in this example. So we have an author here, Gretel Kinsey. You can also have critical dates, such as the date that your content was created and the date that it was revised. Your prologue could also include copyright information, such as the copyright year and the copyright holder. And your prologue could also include information about your product version, your product release, and modification. The prologue metadata is only used for this type of system information like author and dates created, dates revised. DITA does not use the prologue metadata for filtering. Now let's take a look at element level metadata. So at the element level, you usually use attributes instead of elements to specify metadata. And if we take a look at this example, you have an element that's only appropriate for a certain audience. So in this case, we've got a series of steps in a task, and one of these steps is only appropriate for a novice audience. So what we've done is in that second step, there's an attribute of audience and the value is novice. So what that tells us is with this piece of metadata in place, that step is only appropriate for novices. So when you're generating your final output for, let's say, an expert level audience, then you can filter out all of the elements with that audience equals novice metadata applied to it. So when an expert level user gets the series of steps, that second step with the audience of novice will be omitted, so they'll never have to see it. And finally, let's talk about map level metadata and look at an example of how that's used. So at the map level, you can specify metadata in your topic ref or your map ref elements that reference that content that's put together in your map. And what this allows you to do is sort of similar to what we just saw, where you could suppress a step that's not appropriate for your audience. In this case, you can filter out or suppress entire topics or maps that are not appropriate for your audience. So in this case, we have a map and it has two topic refs. And the first topic is only appropriate for a novice audience. So what we've done is added the metadata audience equals novice to this topic ref. And then when we're generating output for expert users, that topic will be omitted. By default, DITA provides you with 3 different attributes that support filtering or conditional processing, which is what's used to filter out those pieces of information that you don't need. And those attributes are audience, which we see here, and you could also use product or platform. If you need to use other metadata elements or attributes for filtering, then you'll need an information architect to create specialization and define that additional metadata for you. And we've actually seen from different clients over the years some common requirements that pop up for things that people need to filter on. So those can be things like customer, if you have customer specific information as opposed to information for internal users. A lot of times people will need to filter by region. So if you've got content that only applies to certain geographic areas, then having a specialized metadata filtering attribute for region might be helpful. And we also have seen a need a lot of times for things like product family. So if you've got a specific group of products and you've got information that belongs only to that group of products, then having some metadata for product family will also be useful. So now that we've gone over all of these sort of different pieces and parts, DITA topics, DITA maps, and how to use metadata, Now let's talk about how we put that all together to get our actual deliverables. So that means we're going to talk about generating output. Most content delivery does not use actual raw DITA files. Instead, what you do is apply style sheets to those DITA files to create output formats like HTML or PDF. And the process of doing that is called transformation. So one way to transform that content from DITA into your final output is using something called the DITA Open Toolkit. The DITA Open Toolkit is just a collection of style sheets, mostly written in XSL or extensible style sheet language. And the DITA Open Toolkit provides a starting point for creating output. And like DITA itself, it is open source and free to use. And the default output from the DITA Open Toolkit is not going to be formatted in a way that's going to be specific to your organization, of course. It's just going to be very generic. So usually when an organization creates content in DITA, what they do is they will have transformations that are maybe enhanced versions of the ones that are included in the DITA Open Toolkit, or even custom ones that have been created completely independently. And those are what are actually used in a production environment instead of just the default transformations in the DITA Open Toolkit. The DITA Open Toolkit also is not the only way that you can generate output from DITA. There are commercial tools that you can use to create output. Some tools provide just publishing output, and then others allow you to do authoring and publishing as well for your DITA content. And these transformations exist independently of the DITA content itself. So you can apply multiple transformations to a single map file. So for example, if you've got a DITA map and you need multiple output types, you could run a PDF transform against that map file. You could run an HTML transform against that map file, or online help transform. Whatever different transforms you need, you can run all of those style sheets against that same map file and get different outputs for each one. And earlier we talked about how DITA content creation exists separately from the formatting. So this is how that actually works. You've got your content creation that you do first, and then you've got the transformation process, which is where you apply that formatting layer to get your final output, and it is done automatically. And we also talked about how this aspect of DITA means that you can create a single source and generate multiple outputs from it. So that's this transformation process is how you actually accomplish that. So I want to just show a quick example of how some different types of output might look. So over on the left, we've got this topic, wild duck species, and it's formatted for PDF output. And then over on the right, we've got that exact same content that's formatted for HTML output. So right away, we can see some differences. Of course, there are differences in things like font choices, colors, spacing, which is typical when you've got different output types that are going to be displayed different ways, especially something like this where you may have print-based versus more digital-based outputs. And then of course, the biggest difference we see is that over on the right with the HTML output, at the bottom we have a piece of text for the parent topic and a link to that, which of course is not in the PDF output because it's not needed there, but in something like HTML, that's necessary. So those are just some examples of how you would have different outputs with different presentations of the way your content looks, even though it's all from the same source content. And that, of course, shows one of these major benefits of DITA that we talked about, which is having multiple outputs from a single source. You only need to write the content one time and store it in one place, and then you can produce all of the different types of output that you need just from that. And because you only have that one source of truth, you know that all of those outputs are going to be consistent with each other. So when you have something like DITA, where your content is flexible, it's tagged so that it has semantic value, it's reusable, and it exists separately from its formatting so that you can have all these different output types from a single source. You know that you have plenty of options and possibilities for how to make your content really work for you. So at this point, I would like to open things up for questions.
Okay, Gretel, you do have a few questions, and let me share those.
All right.
Where can people learn more about metadata and get a list of all the default metadata?
So one place where you can learn a little bit more about metadata and see some examples, of course, is LearningDITA.com. If you go on the LearningDITA site, there is a list of courses, and our Introduction to DITA course covers metadata in more detail, and all of our courses on DITA authoring as well will have examples of using metadata. And then, of course, there is also the DITA standard itself, which is where you can find a complete list of all the metadata. And Alan, I don't know if we can put a link to that in the chat, but the DITA standard is defined and available online since DITA is an open standard. So that's where you can see a list of all the different metadata options that are available in DITA to use.
Yes, you can get that online freely, and there, what we can do also is post that when we post. We are going to post the recordings of this session and all the other ones. We can also post a list of references at that point as well. Another question was, do you have to have an information architect to do a specialization?
So I will go with the typical consultant answer of it depends. You theoretically don't have to, but it is highly, highly recommended that you do have an information architecture to do specialization. And the reason for that is just efficiency and saving cost and time. If you've, someone who is new to DITA and just kind of goes it on their own and teaches themselves how to specialize, theoretically can do it, but you're going to get a much better specialization if you go with an information architect. And that's just because they have the expert knowledge to help you understand what kind of specializations you might need and the best and most efficient way to put those together. An information architect can help you with things like, if you've got an idea in mind for, I need a specialized element that does this, they can maybe tell you, first, is there something in the default data structure that can work instead of having to do that specialization? And then second, if it is required to do that specialization, an information architect is extremely valuable as a resource for putting that together, making sure that it's going to work in the best way for you. So to answer the question, it's technically not required, but it is extremely highly recommended that you do use an information architect for building specializations.
We've got several questions. I'm going to try and rush through them in the next 5 minutes or so. Do you need to be good at XML and other coding to use a DITA map, or can you just use the DITA editor, XML editor effectively and its interface to do that?
If you're working within a DITA specific tool or an XML editor, then what's going to be most useful is having just enough knowledge of XML structure. XML editors will kind of help guide you and tell you things like, is your content valid? Is your map structure valid? Are all of the elements, for example, topic refs and map refs in your map placed correctly, that sort of thing. But having some baseline knowledge of XML is going to help you. Do you need to be an expert at using XML? No, but having just a little bit of background in it will be really, really valuable to you, even if you're using something like an XML editor that guides you through the process.
How can you list or manage all the topics you've created to find existing content easily?
So there are several different ways you can go about this. One that we typically recommend for actually being able to find all of your content easily is using something called a component content management system, or CCMS. And there are a lot of different tools out there that allow you to manage and keep track of your content. If that's something that's not in your budget, for example, then there are other different ways that you can manage and keep track of your content. For example, there are several different free version control pieces of software and tools out there. I know one that's commonly used is Git. And if you have maybe a smaller content set, for example, and you just don't have, the budget or the support for something like a more sophisticated content management system, then using something like that as a stopgap in between will help make it easier to manage and keep track of things like, what topics do I have? When were they last updated? Are they all at the latest version?
And a few more questions along the same lines. I am hearing the term Component Content Management System, CCMS, used in the same vein as DITA. Are they one and the same?
They are not the same. They are frequently and typically used together, but DITA is, since it's an XML standard, it can be used with a component content management system or on its own. What a component content management system does for you is it helps automate and take care of a lot of the processes of keeping track of your DITA files so that you don't have to do that yourself. So it will do things like manage versioning, manage all the different aspects of your workflow. You can publish content, you can hook up your transformations to a component content management system and have a push button publishing process through it. But you can use DITA without a component content management system. It just means that you have to have a little bit more planning on your own and thought process on your own with how you organize all of your files, how you keep track of them, how you manage version control, and how you publish your output. So it's possible to use DITA without a CCMS. They're not the same, and they're not required to be tied to each other. But especially if you have a large set of content or you work for a large organization, having a component content management system does help automate a lot of the processes involved in DITA content creation.
And we have got time for just one last question. And can you use a CCMS to manage translation?
So you can. A CCMS does not on its own manage translation, but there are certain ones that have aspects that can help you with translation. There is something called a translation management, and there's a whole other workflow of tools that you would use for translation as well. Those can be connected to your CCMS so that, for example, when you have content that you need to translate, your CCMS might have some aspects in the workflow of how you package that content up and send it out for translation. So you would send that out to translation vendor, and then it may have aspects in the CCMS in your workflow about what happens when you get that translated content back. But as far as managing all aspects of translation or localization inside of a CCMS, no, it just can connect with other systems and tools that help you manage localization.
Many people are asking about getting this information later. We are posting a recording of this session and all other sessions to LearningDITA.com. So if you have a LearningDITA.com account, you will be able to access this information after the event is over. And with that, Gretel, I want to thank you very much. And
Thank you.
And everyone, we did post the link to our evaluation survey. Please click that link and fill out the survey for this. And we are about to move into our next session. And in just a few minutes, Dawn Stevens of Comtech Services is going to talk to you about DITA, minimalism, and other best practices for TechCom and how they are integrated with DITA. So stay tuned for that. Thank you, everyone.